Welcome to the Spoiler Alert podcast. And today we're starting a whole new series. This series is called Movements in Movies. And we're going to be diving into genres, eras, some overlap there, new Hollywood, stuff like the Golden Age, Silent Era, the 90s independent movement, the 80s action flicks, all kinds of stuff. But today's subject matter is J-horror, which is Japanese horror. We've already done a video about one piece of J-horror in Audition. So I encourage you to watch that. Please hit the like button, subscribe. Dakota is definitely more well-versed in J-horror than me. I did end up doing some homework here. So we got some movies that we can talk about. And there is one movie of our list today that I think we can devote an entire movie to. So we'll try not to dive into it too deep today.
I'm happy to talk about that for an entire episode.
All right, so let's start with Ringu. I had seen The Ring, as a lot of American audiences have. I'm not the biggest horror fan, but yeah, I remember watching The Ring, which is I think 2002 or 2001.
2002. Yeah, and then and Gore Verbinski is the guy who directed Pirates of the Caribbean in 2003.
Yes, and he got an Oscar for Rango. I remember that.
Oh yeah, with giant. Wasn't that the lizard animated movie? Yeah. So I didn't know he did that one, but
yeah, that's how he got an Oscar. A lot of the audience today might know a thing or two about The Ring, but if you don't know about Ringu, let's just I'll get handed over to you and let's give it a little bit of backstory of like kind of what Ringu's about and its influence on the American version, which is almost shot for shot.
I mean, the brief background would just be, okay, so most people commonly refer to it as Ringu because which is kind of bizarre because it was released in the US on home video as Ring with a U attached to it. The U is, I mean, the way you technically pronounce it would be like Ringu. Like where the U almost doesn't exist, but nobody's going to do that. So nobody can be faulted for saying Ringu. I mean, everybody just calls it Ringu. I do. I mean, because it just sounds dorky to be like, Ringu. Yeah, Ringu. It's not how people are going to go around saying the movie. But it's also kind of a bizarre choice because just like originally in Japan, like it was, even on their poster art, it's, they had it in English as The Ring, so I think that was just kind of a choice to like, but yeah, so Ring started with the novel by Koji Suzuki in 1991. He wrote it with the intention of adapting it into a film, so he retained the rights to the film rights to it when he wrote it. So he didn't make a lot off of the publisher, but he intended for it to be adapted to film, and the first adaptation would be 1995's Ring, the made-for-TV film that aired on Fuji TV in August of, I think I just said 1995, but it was released on home video the following year in 1996 as Ring Kazanban, and this is how this version is typically referred to as Ring Kazanban, just to kind of help distinguish it from the other versions. But Kazanban just translates to like the complete edition because there were 10 additional minutes and some alterations in the editing for the home video release. But it's probably the most faithful adaptation of this novel, and it really plays up kind of the investigative journalism aspect. But anyway, it did relatively well, but then Hideo Nakata's version came out in 1998. Before that, Hideo Nakata did in 1996 the film Don't Look Up, which is very much like Ring. So I mean, if you kind of want to trace J-horror as sort of the tropes that we've come to know and expect, it would kind of start with Don't Look Up. I mean, you can go way back. I mean, it's not like this is the first occurrence of horror in Japanese cinema. I mean, you could go back to like we were talking
Right.
about House in 1977.
I wasn't well versed in J horror. I definitely have a very like large respect for it now, especially Pulse.
Yeah.
Especially Pulse,
I'm
which I
just so
think
happy that somebody else has seen that movie. Like I said,
like actually Matt Stoner, he's seen Pulse, he's seen all that stuff.
He's
Dude,
like my new favorite person.
I'm telling you, I told him and I told you, you two can get along. Because like he saw it audition. He's one of the only
Was he the one who
commenters.
left that comment about Gozu?
Yeah.
He's a sick fuck. He's the sickest bastard. Gozu is so fuck. That's God. I had to watch that for my side video. That dude's a sick bastard. Gozu is fucking. Your friend is fucked up, man.
I ended up talking to him about, and this all got cut, but I ended up talking to him about Takashi Miike, and he was like, no, something's wrong with him. Like he's like legitimately fucked up. So
no, he is. I know. Okay, but I can outdo him. All right. I watched Tokyo Gore Police. I had no idea where, because I brought that up in the audition video, right? Like because what's her name, the model that played the woman, is in Tokyo Gore Police. I just thought, it's gonna be like kind of a pulpy, campy gore fest, right, dude. I've seen messed up movies, and there's nothing. I mean, I can't talk about Tokyo Gore Police is the most messed up movie I've ever seen in my life. But a close second would be Gozu. But I think Tokyo Gore Police puts Takashi Miike to shame, which is saying something, because that dude, like Gozu, is beyond messed up, and Tokyo Gore Police is even worse. So if you want to see the worst shit ever committed to film, watch those.
But first off, Dakota, who directed Ringu? Do you know anything about like the process of making it? And then we'll kind of go back and forth on why we liked it, why, things we thought could have been better.
Well, Hideo Nakata is the director of the 1998 version of Ringu. Before that, I think, again, in audition, I don't know how much it made Final Cut, but I was talking about how, like, you saw the decline of Japanese cinema in the in the 70s, but definitely much more so in the 80s. And directors were reduced to basically making softcore porn for a good while there, which I always see as kind of, I don't know.
They're called pink films, right?
Yeah. Okay. And so Nakata and Kiyoshi Kurosawa and a lot of the greats, that's where they started out. So was kind of being forced to do softcore porn if they wanted to do any kind of film at all, which I always see as kind of being funny, because the sort of the cliche is that actresses will get into porn in the hopes that they'll break through the concrete wall of mainstream into, and you have the occasional Sasha Grey or whatever for a little while, or Jenna Jameson, but yeah, in this case, it's the directors, and they actually got really lucky, because and that's kind of due to Hideo Nakata, because you had in the early 90s, you had a show on TV in Japan was sort of short story, ghost stories or whatever. It's episodic, and a lot of the names that you'd recognize from J horror started there, but really, I think the most concise version for the average person would be Hideo Nakata directed a film in 1996 called Don't Look Up. And this was seen by Koji Suzuki, the original writer of The Ring, which was published in 1991 by Katakawa Shoten. And he wrote the original novel with the intention of it being adapted to film. And it was, as a made for TV movie in 1995, as Ring Kazanban, as we talked about. But anyway, he saw Don't Look Up in 1996. He really, admired Hideo Nakata's work, and so that was the guy he wanted to direct Ring, and so Ring came out in 1998. But the thing is that the sequel to Ring was filmed subsequent or not subsequent simultaneously with Ring, and they were released back to back. So you had the original sequel to Ring, which was Rasen, which translates to Spiral, and it wasn't well received. But those two movies were filmed at the same time and released at the same time, and so when Ring was released, people got to see the immediate follow-up, which was based on Suzuki's 1995 novel Spiral Rasen. Yeah, so Rasen sucks. In short, it's really it's awful, and you're not missing out on anything. But Ring was hugely popular, and sort of caught the attention of Western filmmakers where it was shown at film festivals and whatnot. And gradually this led to the Ring 2002, directed by Gore Verbinski. But it was DreamWorks, which is Steven Spielberg's company, right? So like
Yeah.
I must have picked up on that, and that's really where we Western audiences were introduced to it. I mean, before that, it was shared around on kind of bootleg videotapes, which kind of is sort of meta and whatever, and it was sort of an underground thing, but it wasn't until the Ring 2002 that really reached Western audiences on a wide scale. So but yeah, so I mean, I get that's the short version, and that's where Ring fits in. It is, for all intents and purposes, the genesis of J horror. I mean, there you can trace it back, and further than that, and you can talk about, but Ring is where the popularity starts. So yeah, that would basically be it.
And a common feature of most J horror of this era. So we're talking about like 97 or 98 through, would you say, like 2003?
Yeah, I've seen people break it down to different like waves, so and I've seen that. I never really thought of that before, but there's a general decline in J horror, and I guess you could argue that starts with Takashi Miike's One Missed Call in 2003, and so that's kind of considered from what I've seen, second wave of J horror. Where there's a general decline, and then by the third wave, it's certainly declining quite a bit. So that by the time we hit 2010, it's essentially not there, in terms of Western adaptations and all that. But its influence, but sort of the frustrations with PG-13 films, like PG-13 horror films, unfortunately could kind of be attributed to the J horror adaptations,
Right.
and
Because
so
a common feature is that a lot of J horror movies like don't show
yeah,
the gore, don't
simplification.
show the violence. Audition is different in that way.
Yeah.
But like even in Ring, the goriest it gets is like the well scene and the fingernails and the skull and all that.
Yeah.
Which and I liked Ring. I liked Ring.
Honestly, it's not my favorite. And I mean, I know that's kind of controversial, but like I really
Yeah.
feel that like entries like Dark Water and Pulse are infinitely stronger.
Yep. I agree with you 100%. So Ring, I enjoyed both of the lead actors, the male and the female. Not sure of their names off the top of my head, but I've seen the
I'm
male
not
and
even.
stuff.
Yeah,
I
he's in a
think he
lot
was
of
in
stuff.
Last Samurai.
Oh, you probably. Yeah, he's in a lot of movies. So
Yeah. But they were both good. I never got like too afraid in either adaptation, just because the girl looks at you and you're scared so badly that your heart stops and you literally scare stiff. If you want to give some background about Ju-on, and because I do think that they do some things that are more clever than they do in modern horror, but altogether I didn't like the film that much.
I still really like Ju-on, so I mean maybe that's the difference, but I do feel it's maybe the least of them.
Part of it too could be like I've been so desensitized to just scary kids nowadays that I'm like, that blue kid doesn't scare me. like I don't know.
Did the kind of exorcist, scene at the end at least get to you a little bit where Kyoko's, crawling down the stairs? Because like it fucked up my brother because I'm an asshole brother. I left him alone with Ju-on, and just because I'm a prick. The whole thing is that the TV is right in front of the stairway, and so and like it's I came back and he's like, he didn't say it, but he
was like, "You son of a bitch."
Yeah. But
I mean,
I'd already seen the Reagan crawling backwards, down the stairs, and the exorcist, so it didn't affect me as much, but he was fucked up by it. So
yeah, it was definitely like, I definitely think that they filmed individual scary scenes. They weren't really jump scares. A lot of the scares were like visible to the audience, but not necessarily visible to the character at the time. Like there's that scene where like the kid is up on like sort of staircase balcony. I don't know if it's exactly the scene you were talking about though.
No, I know. No, that was at the end, but I know what you're talking
about. But it's like you see the audience sees it, and then they're still scared for the character. So I get that, and I actually thought that was kind of clever. Where the movie lost me is I don't think it's more like the story structure where, it goes one person to another, like you don't really stick on one character too long. And I don't think they did enough with each character in their isolated time on screen to really like connect with the audience super well. That's my main criticism of Ju-on.
And that's completely, because I've thought about this a lot, and it's like,
it is a bold move though. I can appreciate like them trying something. It just didn't work for me.
Yeah, so as far as the story structure, I mean, it definitely evokes something like Pulp Fiction. Later iterations do handle it a bit better, and I've thought about this, but the one moment that stands out to me in Ju-on the Grudge, because this isn't even the first Ju-on film.
Like I also like looking at it was because we're talking about Ju-on the Grudge, right? It was the first feature-length film that got released, that had a theatrical release.
Yeah.
Because weren't there two before it that were direct to video? And what's the story behind that?
Okay. No. So direct to video in Japan is called V Cinema, and that saw quite an explosion of popularity in the 80s because, as I said, there was quite a decline. But V Cinema proved to be quite profitable in the form of horror films and pink films. But Yakuza films were very big. And that's, you can see a lot of that with a lot of these major directors getting into Yakuza films. But and so at the tail end of the 80s in Japan, you had his last name's Miyazaki, and like not like Hayao Miyazaki of Studio Ghibli fame, quite the opposite. And he had perpetrated unspeakable acts that I won't linger on, but whatever. Anyway, this caused a moral outcry in Japan, like just culturally, probably something akin to like the Satanic Panic in the 80s that we had, and so the short version was basically no more guinea pig films. I mean, I think the last one released was like in 1991.
So this all plays into the appeal of direct to video.
Well, yeah. So that was the guinea pig series was a direct to video series. But even I think an interesting kind of thing is that even with the final release in 1991, it became kind of self-parodying, as you saw in American horror, and well, with like Scream and whatnot, so the final installment was, yeah, kind of like self-deprecating horror. But yeah, so straight to video horror was very profitable in the 80s, but after the moral outcry in Japan after these killings. But yeah, so I think J horror was kind of born out of necessity, is kind of the conclusion I've come to, because the decline of Japanese cinema, which gave rise to anime, because it was cheaper to make. And that produced like Akira in 1988, which is like I it's a long list, but I consider Akira to be like one of the greatest movies of all time, like probably somewhere on my top 200 or whatever. Yeah, but like,
Right.
but anyway, so I mean, it wasn't a total loss, but V cinema was doing really well, but then that happened, and then so J horror kind of formed, because for one thing, it's easy to do when you're not showing all these gore effects and it's all implication, you know. You and then when you have sort of censors or whatever in place where they won't even allow you to do that, you can see where kind of a need for reinventing horror, as it's traditionally known, would come about. So yeah, and if you look at like Ring and Dark Water and Pulse and whatever, there's not a lot of gore, not a lot of violence, and it's a lot of implication, and it's low budget, and the earliest examples of that, tying it back into Ju-on, which started as V Cinema in the 90s.
So do you know what the direct to video Ju-ons were like, the first two?
Yes. Well, yeah. So I talked about the sort of the moral outrage, and it's not like it was impenetrable. I mean, we got Takashi Miike films in 1995, so there were exceptions, but they were controversial. But Takashi Shimizu's Scary Stories of Japan or whatever on DVD. So I actually got to watch those first two uh, straight to video, or short films, and but those were remade for Ju-on the Curse and Ju-on the Curse 2. Ju-on the Curse 1 and 2 were released in 2000. But his and those short films were recreated within Ju-on the Curse 1 and 2. But they're worth seeing on their own. I mean, they're like 3 minutes long, but he manages to create sort of a sense of dread and terror within a very short span of time. But anyway, I mean, Ju-on the Curse 1 and 2 are chronologically, like, they're canon, so you watch those and then you watch Ju-on the Grudge. Most people would go straight to Ju-on the Grudge, which is fine, in 2003, and then its sequel, Ju-on the Grudge 2, in 2004, I think. But yeah, technically it starts with Ju-on the Curse, and yeah, I think it's Ju-on the Curse 2 has sort of the backstory behind the Grudge. So, like, I mean, you saw the Grudge, Ju-on the Grudge. Mm-hmm. But so the whole reason the husband murders the wife is because she becomes obsessed with this school teacher who's teaching the little boy, yeah, and so she becomes completely infatuated with him, and she writes in her journals, how, like, she wants to have his child and blah 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 blah. And the husband finds these journals, and but what I remember is I think she was pregnant at the time, and she just, oh fuck, how did it go? She had just given birth, and she had already had the little boy, but I think she had just given birth, and the husband reads her journals, thinks she's infatuated with this school teacher, thinks that the child isn't his. I don't know if it's infamous, but it's infamous to me. This scene where he runs down the street with a sack, and it's very clear what's in the sack, and that's the newborn child, and so it's smashing it off of things. It's fucking awful. And yeah, it's pretty bad. And and he's calling up the school teacher all the while, telling him about how he's killing his newborn child. And but yeah, he strangles her, butchers his son, who was legitimately his, but he doubts even this, and kills the house cat, which leads into Ju-on the Grudge. So you don't need to know all of that. You just basically need to know that this guy killed his wife and kid. But there is more to it if you want to watch Ju-on the Curse 1 and 2. And Ju-on the Curse 1 and 2, I mean, are probably the more, like 2, I think, if it's the one that involves the baby in a sack, is probably the more violent of any of the Ju-on entries. So it kind of becomes relevant to the escalating violence in the series, because Ju-on the Grudge is more implication, but the violence does escalate with later entries. And people find that kind of jarring, but you can trace it back to Ju-on the Curse too. In 2010, there were two films released. I guess they'd be short films. Ju-on Black Ghost and Ju-on White Ghost, back to back, each comprise about an hour, and they were released in 2010. And Ju-on Black Ghost is a really good movie. It kind of evokes Ring, though, in terms of like you have a sister approaching sort of the psychic character, you know, much like Ring, where the wife is approaching her ex-husband, who it's very heavily implied has sort of, you know, a sixth sense. But it's good. There's not a lot of violence, but Ju-on White Ghost gets a lot more experimental with its editing and whatever. It's not bad, but it is disturbingly violent. It really takes things to the max. It's really, you know, very violent. And then Ju-on Origins, which just released on Netflix last year, is arguably more violent. But even after after seeing Ju-on White Ghost, like, I don't know. I mean, but so there
And
is fight.
you've had some criticism of the Netflix series, right?
After watching about like what over a dozen fucking J horror movies back to back, I actually have a greater appreciation of the Netflix version. But yeah, I thought it lingered on the violence too much. It lingered on the more lurid aspects. Like you know, like there's a guy who hangs himself, and it's like if they had shown, you know, like this sort of puddle there were ways that you could have edited that, but it plays up the lurid aspects of it, where he's hung himself and he shit himself, and it's showing the dripping shit on the floor. It's like it's you didn't need to do that. Like there's a way to imply what had happened, you know.
Really, only someone like in love with the entire genre would be able to kind of stomach that in a story.
Ju-on, well, I'll do my quick review of Ju-on Origins here. As a human drama, it's absolutely great. It really is. It's one of the most intense dramas I think I've seen. But the violence in it undermines it a lot. You know, like the violence, I mean, heightens the human drama, but it's so indulgent that I think people would be so off put by it that they just couldn't sit through it. I mean, and the other thing is that it becomes kind of wacky with its timelines at the very end, where it almost becomes incomprehensible. So it's really the human drama aspects that save it, not the horror. The horror kind of fails. You know, so it's kind of interesting in that way, but it's ruthlessly intense as a drama. Like, so I would recommend that people that like really intense stuff, you know, they should watch it, but horror, it actually kind of fails at. But yeah, so like I know a lot of people could probably point to Ju-on Origins as like the decline of like J horror, you know, and be like, see, it's relying on gore and all this and whatever, you know, which is very far removed from what made it so appealing in the first place. But you know, something like Ju-on White Ghost and even the Ju-on franchise in general has probably been the more violent of any of the mainstream J horror entries. I mean, even Ju-on the Grudge, the 2003 version, probably shows more blood than any J. I mean, you watched Ringu and Pulse and Dark Water. I mean, there's definitely more blood shown on screen than in Ju-on.
I mean, obviously, if we're classifying Audition as J horror,
yeah, okay, well that's Um,
It's
definitely
kind. It
local.
sounds like it sounds like audition like fits into the genre. It seems, but it's definitely a diversion.
Yeah, yeah. I see. I don't know. Obviously, Takashi Miike was allowed to do what he did, so he was allowed to make those movies. So the
Mhm.
censorship parade must have not been that strong. But I mean, but it's still, you know, is kind of an outlier, compared to what is traditionally associated with J horror. So in terms of its violence, like and definitely with his subsequent films, and I mean he's fucked up. I mean I could
Yeah,
talk, yeah. So, but
yeah. The third movie on the list that I watched was Pulse, and it's one of the most like present day relevant movies made like
apps
20-ish years ago or more that
like
I've seen
2001, yeah.
that I've right that I've seen
But it
in a
wasn't
long time.
released here until 2005 by Magnolia, I think, because that's when I
Okay.
was able to get my hands on it. And then it was one of the more controversial movies released. It was called Suicide Club. The effects get a lot of shit, but it was basically the same. Like basically think of it as like the Japanese version of M. Night Shyamalan's The Happening. Into like when was that released? 2007. But Suicide Club, like it's not, it has its qualities. I kind of got what it was trying to say before, like I even ever read up. I was kind of trying to be a pop culture statement because you like it's similar because there are these mass suicides taking place, and nobody can account for it. Nobody can explain it. Um, and it's hype. It's very gory. Even the opening scene, like I was thinking, like, what if, like, I'm like, who's going to throw themselves onto the tracks? And then I thought, what if they all threw themselves onto the tracks? And that's what happens. Like 50 schoolgirls jump onto the subway tracks and get just plowed over by this fucking train. But the gore was really, yeah, it was a really controversial movie, but it has nothing next to Pulse, which shows very little gore.
And
But you
I
could,
think that's such a smart way to do it because I mean suicide's brutal and suicide, depending on the manner in which it's done, can be gory or whatever,
mm,
but it's not the gore that irks people, about when they think about suicide.
yeah,
It's the psychological factors. It's the loneliness. It's the isolation.
mm,
It's mhm.
that's what makes it so deeply disturbing, is a sense of isolation.
Like I don't think any J horror that I've seen, because even I like Audition quite a bit, and sometimes the more I think about Audition, the more I think that I should, maybe it's more of a 5-star movie, honestly, because I do like it quite a bit.
Mhm.
Um, but the story behind Pulse is so well served for its genre, where it's a horror genre that generally doesn't show gore. And lots of times when you associate in real life with suicide, it's from, there's there's like, there's shitty things that happen when people walk in and their friend kill themselves and there's gore there or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's almost always from this distant perspective where you
Just
learn that your friend or learn that someone that you knew killed themselves, and you're not really associated with it because there's this distance, but this distance is part of what made the suicide happen. The exponential like distancing of people is a contributing factor. And what happens to these people in this movie is they watch these online videos and basically they end up killing themselves and their soul gets trapped into cyberspace. And it's one of the most relevant movies I've seen that's like 20 years or more or older. I'm not super anti-tech, like I'm not like Christopher Nolan levels of like I'm staying away from it, but it's
so,
you know, but people
so
just pouring their lives into like social media and internet. People thought that going in that it would bring people closer together, and in some
yeah,
ways it can. I love that we're able to do this and I live an entire state away from you. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
but if you don't do it for the right reasons, or if you're not going about social media in the right way, I guess it divides you more. And people hang out less. Like I saw like some fucked up stats today about that kind of stuff, about like people being distant from each other and not interacting with each other at like higher rates than ever, even up to like 2019. You know what I mean?
No, no, yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I read a lot of similar statistics about just, I mean, like most people only have like one friend, if that, a lot of relationships aren't formed, and just, yeah, I mean, it's people are probably more distant than ever, and it's not really a shame. There's a lot of scare about the population declining because of that. I mean, in Japan, but even beyond Japan. So when they really saw the writing on the wall, I mean, because that was, I think it's easy for people to forget, and I'm not, this is super basic, but the initial promise of the internet was what you were describing, this idea that you could connect with somebody across the globe. It was the idea was that, it would unite everybody and bring people together. But I think Pulse recognized pretty early on that wasn't the case, and you had other things coming out at that time, like Metal Gear Solid 2, which is a video game by Hideo Kojima, but which is so fucking ahead of its time. It's crazy, but but anyway, and the idea in that was that people would retreat into their own little, as it's described in the game, little ponds. That nobody is right and nobody is wrong. Everybody just retreats into their ponds, and information seeps into the larger cesspool of society, and nobody can make sense of truth, because there are so many truths being submitted to, it's a mind fuck, that game. And a lot of people associate kind of like meta narrative in video games to BioShock in 2007, which I love, by Ken Levine, but it really does start with Hideo Kojima's Metal Gear Solid 2 in 2001. So for whatever reason, that seemed to be, maybe it's just coincidence, but it seemed to be really an idea there in Japan that was in 2001 that was really, coming to the forefront, that the internet is not going to bring us together, it's going to bring us apart. And I mean, there have been plenty of skeptics and people warning about that, but I can even remember, from that time, but it really accentuated every fear, and those have since come to pass. I really feel,
And again, we're talking about like, this is like before COVID, when everything seems
oh yeah, no,
that
way
wasn't
before
online
COVID.
went online.
This has
This
been
was
the case
this
since
was
probably the inception.
mhm. It's like people are are putting a price on their own happiness, and that price is determined by social media currency. So how many likes you get on an Instagram, how many likes you get on a Twitter, how many
Way
likes you
before
get on a
any of that.
Facebook.
Yeah.
But there are literally people on social media that just devote, that put their self-worth into basically getting compliments from people.
Mhm.
And that's just one example. Like I said, like people put their happiness within currency, and as soon as you put a price on your happiness becomes limited. You know what I'm saying? Because if you don't put a price on your happiness, your happiness could go through the roof. You know what I mean? Like the sky is the limit potentially, whatever, shit happens. No one's happy forever. Everyone's going to have ebbs and flows and peaks and valleys, but you're probably not going to just stay in an endless slope or down. All of that is conveyed in this movie, and I really love it. And like, it talks about how it's also a a spreadable like disease, like a pandemic or something, where like it just becomes more and more common, and then it's just like all of a sudden, because in the movie, like, it starts off with like one or two suicides, and then by the end of the movie it's apocalyptic, and there's like
Which is
Japan's fucking gone, and they're like, where's the country they try to go to? They're
Somewhere in South America, they get a faint signal.
yeah, I thought it was like Argentina
That's
or
as close
Chile.
to hope as you fucking get in that movie. So
Yeah, and it's a brilliant movie. It's so relevant.
I'm fucking so
It's
glad you
fucking
like it.
sad.
It's comforting. I love that movie to death.
uh
So, and I know everything you're saying is true. It's just it's so true that I don't know what to say because it's like
it-
you're tapping into so many things that I think about. But I think the core of all that is exemplified in Pulse. Like it's like the issue at its root is the same, and it's but no, I totally absolutely relate to everything you're saying as far as social
yeah,
media and everything.
so just I don't know, like if this is any message to people, just value your own happiness and the happiness of others greater than like your likes and follows and bullshit.
Yeah,
Because
I
I
that's the
mean, because
closest
we
I've gotten. It's like it's you and the people you, which I mean sounds selfish, but whatever. Fucking like nobody's gonna give a fuck about you but you. So it's like that's one thing you'll learn, especially as you advance beyond your teenage years. Like nobody gives a flying fuck, and you are on your own. So if you can bring yourself to give the faintest fuck about yourself, tap into that, and
and
like 'cause that's as good as it gets. And then the people that you care about, and beyond that, don't give a fuck.
and the people
Yeah.
that you know that you can trust, fucking hang on to those people, because the older I get, the less people I trust.
Oh my god. Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
Nitro. Yeah.
Yeah. uh because I mean, we ask you to like and subscribe and do all that bullshit, but either way, like if we go like 10 years averaging like 30 views a video, we're doing this because we want to. We're
Right.
like
No,
it's
right. Which is like
like
I just wish I'd done it sooner, like
I
because
mean, it just, if we have to make 1,000 video, if we make 1,000 reviews and then fucking die, and then years later they like dig through our shit, like, because part of me too is like, maybe if anyone is listening, it's the AI. Maybe they'll actually listen to our videos and be like, oh, what makes a good
I
movie?
I'm
It's not.
scared shitless of that idea because they just digged up that caveman dude or whatever, and they like dissected his fucking guts and his fecal matter. I'm like, God, that'd be my luck. And the one dude, 10,000 years later, they're going through my shit and they're like, God, this guy was gross. Can you believe what he was eating? Like,
Anthropology is crazy and that kind of
is
stuff,
that
and
what that would be?
paleontology.
Anthropology?
I think if it's a study of past humans, it's some form of anthropology. Anyway, so I encourage anyone to please, like, Tubi is free. It has ads,
Yeah.
but get Tubi on whatever you got. Uh,
It's
and
available on
then
consoles. So, like, I mean, if you have a PS4 and Xbox One, whatever, or the
yeah,
newer consoles, I think
smart
it's on
smart
that.
TVs, like get Tubi, like live with the ads. Watch Pulse, please,
Yeah.
especially if you feel super stressed out, and it might not make you totally feel better, but it might not make you feel alone either, and that's a big part of it.
So, I mean, for that one, I'd probably give it a 4 just because most people probably, would find like it's almost two different halves. You have the horror half and then you have like the apocalyptic half, you know,
Mhm.
it might be jarring for most people. And
Yeah, it is a bit of a
personally, it's a 5,
transition.
right? Like, I
Yeah.
mean, for me, but yeah,
For me, the only part that I thought it started a little slow, but I actually adjusted to the whole apocalyptic swing very well. So Dark Water is similar in ways with Pulse, as far as like its human qualities to the story.
what what
The
what did you think of it? I mean, as far as like, I mean, because I thought that would be the one that would probably resonate with you the most in terms of like it's kind of more drama than horror, really.
Right. Pulse ended up resonating the most. But second, like right behind would have been Dark Water, because it's basically a horror movie about like kind of divorce and how it can like affect the children and affect the adults, but mostly it's about the effect of the children in this movie.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily anti-divorce. I'm more anti-marriage, which is more pessimistic, I suppose. But I mean, do what makes you happy, folks. But
Yeah, there isn't really a compelling reason to get married nowadays. It's
I
truly an
mean,
expression of pure love, which tends to get fucked. So
Dark Water is mainly focused on the kind of dark, like the bad shit that happens to kids when their parents go through divorce. And there's basically a ghost that lives in this apartment that this newly divorced woman and her daughter live in. And the top, there's like this water tower area like you see at the top of like city buildings. Turns out that years previous, a divorced couple's little girl had been screwing around and climbed the water tower and fell in and drowned and died, or became a ghost. And then that ghost is constantly haunting, looking for a new mother. And she finds that mother within this this woman who had just moved into this apartment. And like throughout the movie, water's leaking, and it's a kind of like gradual a gradual thing where water leaks into their rooms until it's an eventual flooding. So the way it ends is this kid, like the kid that had drowned from the previous, tenants, or the previous divorced couple that had drowned, like the ghost kid, if you will. And it's creepy as fuck because it's like just rotted skin and like no eyes, I don't think, and shit. And
yeah,
she's just saying like mommy, mommy. And basically at the end, the woman has to take care of the ghost girl, and can't take care of her own daughter. Uh so I just think it speaks on bigger themes where it's like, if you have a kid and you get divorced, or if you can't take care of a kid, that responsibility gets kicked down the road.
yeah,
But it is like a very well crafted horror movie. It is creepy. Again, it's not one of those. It's not like one of the exceptions of J horror that shows a lot of gore. It's the scariest part is probably just the rotted kid body.
right.
It's more creepy than anything.
So Dark Water was based off of one of Koji Suzuki's short story collections, which came out shortly after Pulse. The same director that did Ring Zero, which is a prequel to Ringu, which came out in 2000. He did one of the short stories in Dark Water for Showtime's Masters of Horror, which we kind of brought up earlier. Anyway, I forget the short story, but he was the writer across the board on like all of the Ring films, but he didn't feel like Hideo Nakata had sort of the chops after Ring 2 in 99 to do a proper horror movie. Dark Water came out in 2002. It was directed by Hideo Nakata, who did Ringu and Ringu 2. And it was adapted from one of Koji Suzuki's short stories from his short story collection, Dark Water. He retained Kenji Kawai for the soundtrack, who just some of the best soundtracks I've ever. Oh my god, it was the first one I had seen, and I really really loved it. And but I know at the time that the people that wrote Dark Water adapted it to screen were frustrated with Hideo Nakata's version because they didn't feel it was frightening enough. Yeah, I mean, I disagree. I know the human drama kind of takes the front line on that film, but yeah, I mean, like the scene you were talking about with the revelation of the rotten girl or whatever in the elevator, you know, and when she finds her daughter in the apartment room above her, and yeah, I mean, there are a lot of scares in there, and Nakata returned to sort of a similar type of film with The Complex in 2013. And there was a prequel series of The Complex, but I haven't seen it. But it's very different. It's much more in your face kind of horror. So it almost feels like he's kind of answering those critics as far as the original writers of Dark Water go, you know, in terms of trying to make a more overt horror film. But yeah, as far as Dark Water itself, I mean, it's beautifully filmed. I forget the cinematographer's name, but you know, he worked on Ringu in 1998, and there was a remake in 2005 starring Jennifer Connelly, Tim Roth, and John C. Reilly, which, you know, as far as remakes go, I know they get a lot of flack, but Dark Water 2005 isn't anywhere near as good as the original. But you remember the scene where like the daughter's sword being drowned in the tub in the 2002 version, you know,
Yeah.
that's where the 2005 remake, that's where the decision happens for the mother to go, I'll be your mother, you know. So there's an urgency there that I think is more immediate, and I think that again general audiences would probably latch onto, but it omits, you know, my favorite scene, which is that, you know, the daughter returning to the complex years later.
Yeah.
You know,
That
and
doesn't happen in the remake.
no, and it's sort. I mean, sort of, but nothing next to what we got in the 2002 version, where it's like the daughter recognizes that her mother's still lingering there as a presence, you know, sort of, but it happens immediately after, you know, not like 10 years later, you know.
Mhm.
And that surrealism, that haunting surrealism in the 2002 version is really what stuck with me. It is so much of what I loved about it, and so that's gone. So it's more, I guess, logical, you know, as far as the mother needing to make an immediate decision, whereas, you know, maybe people wouldn't understand that she recognizes that this apparition or spirit isn't going to leave them even when they leave the hotel. So that's maybe a plus. I mean, depending on the audience. Yeah, but that haunting ending of the 2002 version isn't really there, you know, and that's what I loved. And that's what sticks with me in my memory. But with Hideo Nakata's 2002 version. But there was one other, oh yeah, the Hotel Cecil. So in 2013, that Asian girl from Vancouver, she's from like Hong Kong, and her parents had moved to Vancouver, and she was discovered in the oh fuck, what do you call water towers? Not water, well, you
Yeah.
know, yeah,
It's a water
of the
tower.
hotel in 2013, and there's video footage of her kind of acting very bizarrely in the elevator, which kind of captivated people or whatever, you know, and then she was later discovered in the water tower of that hotel. I think people had complained about kind of the taste of the water. So, you know, Dark Water basically came to be, you know, 11 years later with that real story of the Hotel Cecil in LA.
But yeah, I think the end scene has so much to say. So I never saw the American version of Dark Water, but
Yeah, I mean, it's not bad its own. I mean, I'm kind of actually impressed by it because it focuses in more on the human drama aspect and the horror, even more so than the 2002 version, where that's kind of a problem that a lot of these remakes run into, is they don't seem to understand how the psychological horror of the original Japanese version like works. And so like Dark Water gets that right, but I mean, it's not nearly as frightening. I mean, the only revelation that you really get that anything supernatural is really occurring is at the tail end of the film. And so it's almost too much of a psychological drama and not really enough of a horror film, which is a criticism that was leveled at, Hideo Nakata, with his original 2002 version. So it's almost worse in that regard. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's bad, but absolutely watch the 2002 version first. Like it does pale in comparison, but as far as remakes go, it's one of the lesser offenses.
Mhm.
So and I would say it's worth a watch. I mean, it's gloomy, it's depressing, it's got a bleak atmosphere that isn't really doesn't make it the most marketable movie. And so I do respect it for that reason, that it didn't compromise itself like a lot of the other remakes did. It doesn't water itself down, but still not anywhere near as good as the original.
Doesn't water itself down. But yeah, so that was the last one that I had watched. Dakota's definitely going in deeper on a guide of J horror. So this was fun. We're gonna try to do more movements in movies. I would just rate out of these four: Pulse, Dark Water, Ring, and then Ju-on. How would you rank them?
Oh, I mean, Paul's most of all, but so like it is a great horror movie, but it's more than a horror movie, and that becomes apparent about halfway through. So it might be jarring to some people, but it is my favorite of them. But so for general audiences, it's a four, but for me, it's like a five. Yeah, like I absolutely, God, that's probably in my top 20 favorite films. So, but after that would be Dark Water, and that's 4.5. I would say I think that's probably the most accessible, and maybe start there. But it really does start with Ring, and that I would give a four. Ju-on, I would probably also give a four. But if you only had to watch two, it's kind of like Sophie's choice for me, but I would say Dark Water and Pulse. But yeah, the big four are probably Ring and Ju-on and Pulse and Dark Water. But Cure is worth watching, and which came out in 97, and like Pulse in 2006 was totally 100% misses the fucking point. Like all the philosophical themes of Pulse are gone, and it just goes coming through a computer and like snatching people up. Yeah, so and that's kind of what happened, and that's why I think that the remake scene kind of declined.
Because in
And
Pulse, we're not even sure how much to blame, like the death ghost or whatever in it. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like it just kind of seems like the natural order. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like
that
there's like it's unavoidable.
yeah, but yeah, so like the 2006 version, totally none of that's in there. It's just ghosts coming out of the computer and snatching people up. And there's none of all of the thematic material that made Paul stand out is completely eliminated in the 2006 version. It just sucks. But that's typical of a lot of the remakes. So where they just didn't understand what made it so deeply disturbing in the first place. It's not the ghosts. It's a lot of the time it's the philosophical themes that they're tapping into, you know, that really make it so frightening, and how it applies to day-to-day life, So, but yeah, I guess in that order. I mean, Pulse is my favorite, but Dark Water would be a good entry point. Then
Yeah,
Pulse.
Dark Water might be, yeah, because Pulse and Audition, I like probably the very, very best if we're
Mhm.
including Audition in that rate in this like listing or whatever.
Yeah.
But they both do seem kind of different
Mhm.
compared to other J horrors.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe Dark Water is the best spot to start because I think it's a little better than Ring. but it does kind of fall in line with the genre a
Yeah.
little closer.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that was Hideo Nakata at like his peak. I mean, I think he understood what worked. Because Ring was like his chance to kind of prove himself. I mean, he did Don't Look Up before that, but Dark Water just seems to get the timing right and all, like I really love Dark Water. So I'd say that's a good starting point. And then from there, Pulse, if you can only watch two movies. But I would say that all four are worth watching if you want kind of a general sense of the genre.
But yeah, so we're gonna plan on doing more movements in movies. This was a pretty good time. I enjoyed watching these movies. Probably gonna still try to watch Cure, which is one that you
Yeah,
recommended that
I
I
think you
couldn't
dig that.
that I didn't get around to. Uh, it's just a different kind of era and genre and like country people might be interested in. Even if you don't like every movie that we talked about here, you might like one of them or two of them, and that could be worth it. And you might just have a better understanding of how some American films are made, because like a ton of them are almost frame for frame remakes of
Yeah.
like Ring was, and these aren't horror movies, but Yojimbo and like with Fistful of Dollars, and like there's all kinds of happens all the time. And sometimes the remakes are better, sometimes the remakes are as good, sometimes the remakes aren't as good. It's just worthwhile to see both sides of it no matter what.